uh, chapter 8 of the book is called Behavior Towards Others. And it's talking about European behavior towards others, obviously, because this whole book is all about Europeans, European culture, European ideology, European energy, and all that sort of stuff. So this chapter is called Behavior Toward Others. And the key concept of this chapter, the key concept that Marimba Ani brings up is this concept of the cultural other. So we've talked in the previous couple of chapters, I think, we looked at how Europeans view others. So it's the images that they have of us as being savages, uncivilized, all that stuff. But now Marimba Ani is taking a step behind the images to say, well, what is the conceptual framework that creates these images? What is it? What is the main concept that the Europeans have, which dictates that they must see us as being savage, uncivilized, and so forth? And for her, this concept is the concept of the cultural other. Now, the cultural other, as Marimba Ani breaks it down, is I'll read it here. The cultural other is broken down on page 403, and the key point that she makes is that the concept of the cultural other rests on expansionism. And Marimba Ani argues that expansionism is one of the most important things to get into your head with regard to the European asili. It's not the same as wanting to unite with others. It's not the same as wanting to unite with the cosmos or other people or this, that, and the other. The expansionism among the Europeans is something very different. So on page 403, she says this. She writes, the cultural other is a creation of European culture, constructed in part to answer the needs of the European utamarojo. Utamarojo being the energies of the Europeans, the energetic drive, the force of Europeans. And so this concept of the cultural other is created mainly to satisfy this energetic drive. The Utamarojo is expansionistic. This, as a cultural characteristic, is itself very important to understand. The ego seeks to infinitely expand itself. This kind of self-expansion should not be confused with the desire to give of oneself, to merge self with other, or to become one with the world. All of these are identified with the spiritual experience of love. Expansionism is the psychological, emotional, and ideological opposite. Expansionism is the projection and imposition of the cultural ego onto the world. It is possible to interpret all manifestations of universalism in this way. It is the expression of arrogance, greed, and an obsession to consume all that is distinguished from self. In this setting, discovered, quote unquote, phenomena automatically become areas to conquer, to be made ours, i.e. European. European expansionism is the delimitation and redefinition of the world in terms of the European self, as opposed to the, and this is interesting, as opposed to the losing of self in the world or in the other, which is the obliteration of the isolating boundaries of self. I quite like that, because that's kind of like almost like a psychedelic kind of thing there, or getting into the spiritual, the higher spiritual practices where, when whoever it might be, people who are into Kemetic science or Buddhism or whatever, they talk about how through different kinds of practices like meditation and transcendental meditation and whatnot, it's possible to experience a different level of being, whereby you're no longer strictly defined by your self, but you're actually your person, I should say, but you're actually, you get into this experience where you are actually completely one with everything. And boy, would I love to experience that. But that's not the main point. The main point that Marimba Ani is saying there is that for the Europeans, expansionism is all about dominating and taking over and controlling and so forth. It's not about this spiritual, higher level of spiritual integration, if you want to call it. Marimba Ani says the concept of the cultural other is a safety valve on European aggression. And this is something we talked about last week, but the idea being that without the concept of the cultural other, these Europeans would destroy each other. They would, because of the distrust and the aggression and the competition that is all part of their intra-cultural behavior, like we talked about last time. They need something outside of themselves, outside of the European community, if you want to call it that, so that they can pour all their aggression and negativity and whatnot, driven by their ultima rojo. They can't destroy, they would destroy each other. So they don't want to destroy each other, but they have to destroy something. And so here comes the concept of the cultural other. And on page 403, again, Marimba Ani kind of talks a little bit more about this concept of the cultural other. And she argues that in European ideology, the cultural other is like the land, territory, or space into which Europeans expand themselves. The cultural other is there for Europeans to define or to quote unquote make over. That is why they can describe their new awareness of objects, peoples, and territories as their discovery, quote unquote. This idea is coherent for them because according to their worldview, it is their role to impart definition to the world. People of other cultural traditions and persuasions are part of the world to be defined by Europeans. It is a European world. And in this sense, the conception of the cultural other is that of the non-human. It is Europeans who define humanness in terms of their own self-image, and with such intensity that the ethic and rules of behavior that apply to those who are like them do not apply to those who are not like them. That's the rhetorical ethic. The cultural other is therefore the person, object, who can be treated in any manner with an unlimited degree of hostility and brutality, as is evident when one reviews the history of Europeans' relations to people of other cultures. It is only non-aggressive and non-exploitative behavior toward the cultural other that is negatively sanctioned in European culture. So again, you hear the Afro-pessimist kind of echoes there, or the foreshadowings of the Afro-pessimist argument there, being that this cultural other, as I've said, as Marimba Ani talks about there, is like a almost like space, empty space, like just a blob of material to just do whatever the hell they want to. So when they come across, I don't know if I said this later, but when they come across things like communal land relations and all that sort of stuff, for them, those are no land relations. They saw that as chaos, as anarchy, as they called it, and they mean anarchy in the stupid version of the term, not the proper version of the term. And so they were like, well, no one owns this land because look, they all seem to be just sharing. I don't know what's going on here, so we own it. We introduced land ownership. Sometimes you hear Europeans when they're propagandizing about colonialism. Sometimes they'll say that, well, nobody owned the land when we went there. There was no land ownership. So we didn't steal anything. We just took what was there, vacant land. That's how they view African land relations. That's how they view communalistic land relations, as basically nothing. There's just nothing. It didn't fit their criteria of ownership and so forth. So they just ignored it. But yeah, such is the cultural other. Marimba Ani then goes on to make the point that the concept of the cultural other it arose at around about the same time that European states began to become a little bit more peaceful with one another, and where forms of political organization within European states began to move away from totalitarianism and extreme brutality and so forth. So as they were becoming more peaceful toward one another, the violence had to be channeled elsewhere. And there's a quote from somebody called Saint-Simon, who was like a proto-socialist. I think they call him an idealistic socialist from the 1800s. But he said something interesting here on page 405. He's calling for a European confederation, and this is 130 odd years before the European Economic Community came into existence, their European Union precursor. And he says this, he says, all undertakings of common advantage to the European community will be directed by the Great Parliament. Thus, for instance, it will link the Danube to the Rhine by canals, the Rhine to the Baltic, etc. Without external activity, there is no without external activity, there is no internal tranquility. The surest means of maintaining peace in confederation will be to keep it constantly occupied beyond its own borders and engaged without pause in great internal enterprises. To colonize the world with the European race superior to every other human race, to make the world accessible and habitable like Europe, such is the sort of enterprise by which the European Parliament should continually keep Europe active and healthy. So that's just an example of this point, that the concept of the cultural other is necessary to keep the Europeans from destroying each other, to keep them from each other's throat. And so where are we? Sorry, where are we? And then so those are some of the some of the key things to say with regard to the cultural other. Where are we? Different, yeah. So here's the key point now. Marimba Ani argues that for Europeans, there is simply no hindrance, no limitation, no controlling or tempering of what they can do to the cultural other. And Marimba Ani argues that this is probably the most important thing to understand about European behavior toward other people, is that there are no limitations, no constraints whatsoever on what they might do to us. And so she says on page 412, she talks about the colonial, she's talking about colonialism, and she says, another purpose of the establishment of the colonial government is to give the illusion of a kind of legality, propriety, or ethical presence that does not exist. And this is important because I think probably a lot of Africans still to this day think deep down that colonialism was basically good. It was, they would argue that Europeans were trying to bring in law and order and, modernity and, industry and development and all these things. They would, and they some of our unfortunately unwoke or sleeping dead African brothers and sisters would say something like, well, if it wasn't for the Europeans, if it wasn't for colonialism, we would have been tearing each other apart in tribal war and all this kind of nonsense. This is the kind of thing they might say, because they think that colonialism was about this stuff, all about legal law and order and blah blah blah. But Marimba Ani is here to say no. She says, there is no European concept of legality that extends to non-European peoples. It is the traditional political strategy of the European to create the impression that such exists, thereby disarming the cultural other whom they exploit, as well as those within their culture who purport to be concerned with the well-being of exploited peoples. If this aspect of European behavior could be understood by people of majority cultures, it would be to their distinct political advantage. It is perhaps more significant than any other single behavioral characteristic. There are simply no guiding rules of conduct, no limitations, no inhibitions in the Europeans' relationship with the cultural other. Therefore, the first and most important political achievement for us is to recognize that we are ultimately and inevitably, in the Europeans' worldview, cultural others. Next, the implications of this concept for European behavior must be understood. It then becomes easy to anticipate their behavior in the intercultural arena. If those who have been objects of European aggression begin to understand the cultural context of that aggression, i.e. the asili or germinating core of the culture that explains it, they will be much more successful in counteracting it. And this is the first of many statements like this, which Marimba Ani recognizes are going to get her in hot water and are going to get people, white people, European people, and some of their cheerleaders amongst other groups, calling her racist and so forth. And she's going to discuss that in a minute. And I get it, because this is getting to the crux of the matter. really get into the crux of the matter. All the previous chapters that we talked about have all been really good, really, really powerful, you know, giving us examples. But this is now getting to the basic explanation of things, how they view us, how they view others. They view others as things that they can just do whatever the hell they want to do. And this helps to explain what's happened in history, as she goes on to give a few different examples to back this up. We can give many, but a few different examples. She talks about the Japanese Americans, and how in the 1940s, during the so-called World War II, there were many Japanese Americans in America, obviously. And obviously, the United States was fighting this war against Japan at that time, Imperial Japan at that time. And Marimba Ani talks about how, so at one point, the Americans decided to round up all of the Japanese and put them into internment camps because they were Japanese, you know, internal enemies. And I think the numbers are pretty high. I think we're talking like maybe tens of thousands of them, maybe hundreds of thousands. I don't know. Like large numbers of people were rounded up and put into these camps, these internment camps. And Marimba Ani points out that, or she reports that a lot of, when you look at the testimony of a lot of these Japanese Americans, they didn't believe that this would happen, because they thought, why would the Americans do something that was unconstitutional? You hear these Black African Americans foolishly talking about the Constitution, and we stand on the Constitution, this, that, and the other. They didn't realize that stuff, that's rhetorical ethic. That's all part of the rhetorical ethic. All this, all men are created equal. All men are created equal, and one nation under God, and all this kind of lovely sounding stuff that's many of our people get bamboozled by. Same in the UK as well. But our people need to understand that stuff is not for Europeans. It's not for them. They will do whatever the hell they want to do. And that's what they did. Yes, it may well have been unconstitutional. I don't know. I don't know the Constitution of the United States that much. But these Japanese people were foolishly thinking that there was no way that the Americans would break their constitution. But they did. And that's what happened to them. She gives several other examples as well. She talks about how the freedom rides and sit-ins in the 1950s and 60s, civil rights era in the United States, when our African sisters and brothers in the US, stood up or sat down in some of these cases. And Marimba Ani, she says that with all due respect to the ancestors and the fallen comrades who took part in these things, she says that these things showed the folly of trying to appeal to the conscience of a culture that has no conscience. So the whole thing, beseeching and pleading to the Americans, European Americans, the military industrial anti-black complex, appealing to them, treat us fairly, Black Lives Matter, or whatever. All of that sort of stuff basically was doomed to fail, because they didn't, again, our brothers and sisters and brothers did not recognize the rhetorical ethic. They did not recognize the truth about how the Europeans see the rest of us. Peace and blessings to everyone in the chat. Peace, Tito District. Nice to have you on board. Lovely to see you, and a peace to you, my brother, pro-black perspective. Really good to see you, my brother. And yes, hope you guys enjoy the conversation. Oni. All right. So what was I saying? So then, Marimba Ani gives a few further examples, and it's some of this was a little bit interesting to read. So some very clear ones. So Leopold, King Leopold of Belgium and the Congo. She talks about how in the space of a decade, 10 million Africans killed, they chopping their hands off and all that sort of stuff. And then Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Marimba Ani talks about how she argues that the Americans didn't have to drop those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Also, she says that, listen, They didn't drop bombs on Rome or Berlin, the nuclear bombs. They didn't drop these atomic bombs on Berlin or, you know, whatever, you know, Rome, Munich, whatever, because that would have just been like, why would you do this to your fellow Europeans? This is unacceptable. But they did drop the bombs on Japan, you know, because why? It's cultural other. You do whatever you want to the cultural other. She then talks about the Tuskegee experiments. Hopefully you all know about the Tuskegee experiments, where they basically lied to a bunch of African American men, saying that they were treating them for syphilis, but really they were monitoring them to see how this disease would spread if left untreated. And again, it's shocking. It's shocking initially if you don't know if you don't understand the Wagwan with Europeans with regard to others. But then once you recognize that especially Black people are just stuff for them to experiment on, do whatever they want on, you know, then that kind of makes sense. And books like a book that I really want to read, I haven't yet read, is it's called Medical Apartheid. That's a book that I really do want to read, because that kind of goes into this kind of whole area of how medicine, and it helps explain the, you know, the distrust that a lot of Black people have toward so-called Western medicine because of these things like this Tuskegee experiment and so on. She then has quite a long discussion about HIV, which I'm not sure I was completely on board with everything that she was saying there. I get she's writing in 1990, probably in the early 90s, even earlier than 1993, maybe 92, 91. And it's interesting as a historical artifact, this conversation that she has, this discussion that she has, because she's talking about HIV as something that's almost a little bit like how people would talk about this recent SARS-CoV-19, you know, in the early part of that, you know, in 2020, when we all started talking about it, it was like, what is this thing? We don't really know. What is it? How does it spread? You know, it's kind of how she was talking about HIV back in those days. And she's basically suggesting that it was created to destroy non-white people. And I don't know, but the fact that conversation can't even necessarily be simply ruled out shows you can't just rule that out. Basically, knowing what I know about what has happened in European history toward Black people in particular, African people in particular, it's potential that was the case. It was potential that even SARS-CoV was potentially you know, chemical warfare of some sort, potentially. But I did find that HIV/AIDS bit, some of the stuff she said that she reported in there, I'm not so sure about. But the overall point still stands, which is that history shows us that there are very few, I'd say very few. Marimba Ani says there are no limits to what Europeans might do to, you know, to non-European people, to the cultural other. Yeah, that's it. Only kind of a little conspiracy theory-ish, and I vaguely remember, I was a youngster in those days when this book was published, but I kind of remember some of these kinds of conversations, particularly when I went to uni and stuff around HIV, that I don't know, were you know, pushing the envelope, and they might be true, I don't know, but it doesn't seem true to me. But the overall point, stands, is that, you know, the cultural other, there's enough evidence to show that behavior toward the cultural other by Europeans, when it comes to that behavior, anything goes. And then then we move on to a more important question, which is why is it? Why are Europeans so implacably hostile to others? Where did that come from? We've touched a little bit on potential explanations beforehand in the last chapter, I think it was, where we talked a little bit about the two cradle theory of Baba Shekante Diop and Francis Cress Welsing's theory of, what should you call it, the melanin deficiency theory, that the fear of a black planet, basically, that Europeans are terrified of being, you know, crowded out by the dark masses, and they're terrified because they lack melanin. So we talked a little bit about that already in the previous chapters, but here it goes. She goes into much more detail on it, and it was a really interesting breakdown. So first of all she deals with, there's a guy called person called Covell. I didn't get the first name, but this Covell guy appears to be trying to explain white racism, European racism, but he uses a Freudian lens. And she argues that the problem with this guy Covell basically argues that I don't know their sex, but they argue that everybody, all peoples, all nations, all peoples, all groups have the same kind of psychological, what's the word? Yeah, psychological dimensions based on Freud's theory. So everybody has all of these. I don't know if I've not read that much Freud, and reading this section kind of showed me that it's going to be, if I ever read any Freud, it's going to be blooming hard work, because he's talking about, like, you know, the Oedipus complex and the feelings that children have toward their mothers and their fathers, and like sexual desire towards them, but then like this whole thing about feeling when children start to potty train, like to learn how to poo and stuff, that it's anyway, some mind-bending weird-ish, basically, that I found it hard to get to kind of like read it without thinking these people are crazy. But the whole idea is that there's all these hang-ups and primordial or primal fears and fantasies and terrors and desires and stuff that we all have. But it just so happens that the Europeans basically were the ones who were successful in channeling all of that into world domination. And Marimba Ani says that the problem is, when you universalize human behavior in that way, you falsely do it. You falsely argue that everyone is the same, has the same psychological motivations and so forth. And so you basically end up just saying that the Europeans, white Europeans, are just better at being what everyone else wants to be. They're just better at being racist than everybody else, and everybody else would like to be in their shoes. And Marimba Ani says, Marimba Ani rules that out. She says, no. Marimba Ani argues that Freud's ideas are not useful for us in trying to understand European aggression and European worldview, because Freud's ideas are based on the same foundational philosophical concepts as the racism and the white supremacy that we're trying to critique. So she rules that out, and she says that actually, in order to understand why Europeans are the way that they are, you need to step outside of European philosophy. You can't use the frame of reference of European philosophy. You can't use use the universalism, the ideas of progress, the idea, you can't use those ideas, because you're just going to end up reinforcing those ideas. You have to step out of that. And so she talks about Mama Frances Cress Welsing's idea, which is a good little discussion. She also talks about what's his name, Michael Bradley's Iceman Inheritance. In less glowing terms, she says that there's quite a lot of contradictions in Michael Bradley's arguments, but she still, considers that even bringing up these arguments, bringing up these ideas are good and useful. And Tito, the myth of the myth of European universalism strikes again. Yeah, and it's I'll have to reread that section again, because it's an important principle for us to stand on, that when you're critiquing European thought, you must do it not using European thought. Ultimately, you have to, the best way to do it is to use African-centered thought, African-centered principles, and so on. And so in this context, she moves on to Richard King. Richard King, ancestor Richard King. Richard King is someone who I've been aware of somewhat. He's got a few lectures here and there on YouTube, and I think I did try to read one of his books once. I did struggle a little bit with it, if I'm honest, because it wasn't, I think the book I had wasn't edited very well. I had loads of typos, and the typesetting was a bit off. So for those cosmetic reasons, I kind of struggled to get into it. But reading his ideas filtered through Marimba Ani here, Mama Marimba Ani, I'm like, hey, okay, yeah, we can do this. So Richard King was all about his book series was called The Black Dot, and it's all about melanin. And he was a real trailblazer, writing in the 80s and 90s. He was a real trailblazer in identifying that melanin is not just about skin pigmentation and blocking the sun, which is the traditional thing that you hear. The mainstream idea about melanin is that it's a skin pigment that stops, that blocks the sun rays and so forth. But Richard King expanded that way out and said, no, melanin is about all sorts of things, much, much more important than just the skin. And even the skin thing, actually, the idea that melanin blocks the sun is not really accurate. Melanin actually takes the energy of the sun and transduces it into something else useful, makes it useful for us in other ways. So on page 468, Marimba Ani says this, bringing it back to the whole point. What's this got to do with the argument with regard to European aggression? Well, page 468, Marimba Ani says this. King argues that blackness or carbon is life and is therefore divine. Let me just stop there and just say, I don't think that people associate or make carbon and melanin the same thing. I don't think they are the same thing, but there's some relationship obviously there. But back to the thing. He says that ancient Africans understood this, that carbon or blackness is life, carbon or blackness is divine. They understood this and called themselves by various names meaning black, such as Kemites, people of the black earth, from which the Greeks developed the word chemistry, and the Arabs alchemy. It's an important point. I quickly searched around that, and that is thought to be one of the etymological roots of those words. Chemistry and alchemy is from that chem. So there's a lot. That's something to unpack. What's that all about? Science, chemistry is the study of blackness. Alchemy, the study of blackness. Recognizing the special significance of their blackness, which far transcended the color of the skin, according to King, these ancient scientists studied the workings of their own minds, which they understood as being identified with their entire bodies. So much for the mind-body split, so basic to European thought. This is what Frankfurt describes negatively as cosmic thought. According to King, the ancient Africans studied themselves until they came to understand the relationship of blackness to spirituality and inner vision, the higher levels of understanding on which synthesis occurs. For them, blackness represented the divine. In his series of works entitled The Black Dot, King supports this contention with an impressive array of references to ancient Kemetic teachings, texts, and symbolic images, and to a host of other theorists and historians. So what did these early advanced scientists discover? And then I absolutely love this section here. But this is on page 469, I think. These original titans found that all life came from a black seed. Life was rooted in blackness. All things possessed the memory of their collective ancestors. Blackness, the universal solvent of all, was seen as the one reality from which spun the threads of the loom of life. All colors, all vibratory energies were but a shade of black. Black was the color of the night sky. Primeval ocean of outer space, birthplace and womb of the planets, stars, and galaxies of the universe. Black holes were found at the center of our own galaxy and countless other galaxies. Black was the color of carbon, the key atom found in all living matter of our world. Carbon atoms linked together to form black melanin. Okay, that's better. The first chemical that could capture light and reproduce itself, the chemical key to life. And the brain itself was found to be centered around black neuromelanin. Inner vision, intuition, creative genius, and spiritual illumination were all found to be dependent upon pineal gland blood-borne chemical messages that controlled skin color and opened the hidden door to the darkness of the collective unconscious mind, allowing the ancient priest scientist to visualize knowledge from the timeless collective unconscious memory banks of the mind. Indeed, the black dot was found to be the hidden doorway to universal knowledge of the past, present, and future. And I mean, that is just breathtaking. That's like, there's a lot in there. If I'd have read this 10 years ago, I would have dismissed all of it. And I think that was probably around about the time I was trying to read the black dot, and I just dismissed it all because I was ignorant. I didn't know any of this sort of stuff. Here I am 10, 12 years later, and I'm like, I've read a lot of this stuff in the textbooks, mainstream textbooks. I've seen documentaries. I shout out to Paul Morris, who shared me a BBC documentary series called, what's it called? The Black God or something, or the Sun, the Sky God, or Star God, something. It's about stars anyway. And like in this documentary series, this scientist, one of the most famous scientists in Britain at the moment, says that all things came from blackness, and all things are going to end up in blackness. The stars all came from blackness, and they're going to end up in blackness. And then all this, neuromelanin. I've done a fair amount of research into neuromelanin, and I understand, neuromelanin is absolutely just a phenomenal entity in our brains that has, so many implications with regard to our brain functioning, and things like. Anyway, then melanin itself, talking about experiencing things and bringing things together. Melanin in the ears, it helps us to hear. Melanin in the eyes helps us to see. There's all sorts of different things that melanin do. And this compendium linking the cosmos as above, so below, you could say, is just beautiful. And the thing that jumped out to me is, for us, just as a tangent, we must identify ourselves with the blackness. I asked Paul Morris about a while back, last year sometime. I was like, Paul, what do you think? Maybe we should stop identifying ourselves with black, because we're not black technically. And I mean, aren't we all just all part of a universal whole? Let's get rid of blackness. Did we even call ourselves black back in the day? And he schooled me on this sort of stuff and sent me that documentary series. Let me find that documentary series. I'll try and find a link to it and put it in the chat, Zizo, so you can watch it. It's like a 6-part series. There's a lot in there. I think I've only watched the first one, but I definitely recommend it. Let's have a look. I'll find it in a bit. I don't think Paul's here, otherwise he'll be able to find it. Where is it? Sorry, I can't find it at the moment, but I recommend it. I will definitely share it when I find it. BBC. There's that famous British scientist, not David Attenborough. There's another guy who's more younger guy, who's kind of gets all the plaudits these days, but I can't find it. But I'll share it with you. I'll post a link somewhere when I do find it. That's the. So hang on, here we go. So yes, I will. Yeah, Tito District. So you said need to check out the neuromelanin series you have on the channel. Yeah, I think I've only got one video on neuromelanin, and it's quite prosaic. It's all about neuromelanin and Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and the links between that and the complexities of the links between that. I recommend it. Oni asked, what is the relationship between consciousness and neuromelanin? Did she say? No, she said the only thing that says here is, where is it? Neuromelanin. The brain itself was found to be centered around black neuromelanin. No, she doesn't go into more detail on that. But I imagine it's going to be something to do with the fact that having a good amount of having a good amount of neuromelanin probably is related to just the functioning of the brain, and there'll be some sort of relationship between that and general consciousness. I suppose you could say, well, yeah, I don't know what. That's the one, Brian Cox. That's the guy's name, Brian Cox. If you search Google for something like Brian Cox Stars documentary or something like that, then you'll come across this thing. Like I said, I've only watched the first one of the 4, but I need to get back to them. And then yeah, Zizo, you said, I find some stuff hard to believe, feels like a need for pride. Yeah, I think what I would say is, I feel like maybe about 50, like in the early part of the sort of YouTube, Facebook era, let's say in like the late 2000s, there was a lot of stuff that suddenly was coming on the internet because we were all new to the internet. It was like, oh wow. And there was a lot of stuff that seemed kind of kooky, if I'm honest, you know, kind of a little bit OTT, you know, I don't know, melanin makes you able to, you know, breathe in space or some sort of stuff like that. There is some like wacky stuff out there. But you know what? I mean, I make that point stupidly about space, but did you know, for example, that mushrooms, black mushrooms that have, you know, black fungi, which are rich in melanin, have been found to be able to resist radiation at far higher levels than anything else. And so they're using this black fungi in, I think they discovered it in Chernobyl in Russia, and how, you know, these mushrooms have just been able to survive there despite all of that. Is it Russia or Ukraine? All of that radiation. And there's actually like some research now that's trying to get these mushrooms up into space to see if these mushrooms could be useful in space travel because of their radiation blocking abilities. Russia, thank you. It's Russia. So, you know, again, 10 years ago, someone said to me, yeah, you know, melanin can enable people to travel in space. I would have, you know, you'd laugh that out and say, shut up, you idiot. But actually, there's mainstream science that's happening right now on that point. Let me have a look. Space travel, melanin. Because I'm saying that, I'm like, I should probably put a link in there because, you know, well, just search. Oh, here we go. This guy's name is Cordero. What's his name? He's got a lecture on YouTube as well. Radamez JB Cordero. I think he's Brazilian, but yeah, he's got an article here called "Melanin for Space Travel Radio Protection." You know, there's a few of them where they are actively looking into that. So there is there's been a lot of stuff out there. There's a link to that paper there. There's a lot of stuff out there that on first hearing you'd think, what the hell is this guy talking about? But don't be too quick to rule it out. Sometimes, and is it in this book that makes a point? Oftentimes this happens. We'll hear something from Marimba Ani or Brian, Richard King, or whoever it might be, even like Jewel Pockrum. Do you remember her? Jewel Pockrum, her name? And we'll think, this is just wacky. But then because we read it in a peer-reviewed article from some non-black people, we're like, oh, it must be true now. It's gone through the peer review system, so it's been written. You know, it must be true. We need to kind of get ourselves a little bit out of that. I'm not saying you're doing this, Zizo, but I know I do this, where I think I must confirm that something is true by seeing it written by non-black people. So it's a bad habit that we do, you know, that we think, oh, I need citations from journals and so forth. But anyway, I did think it was Ukraine. Yeah, Chernobyl was in Ukraine. And then Sister Tito District, you said, I've actually been learning about that recently, with the connection between melanin, light therapy, quantum biology, and neurology. Yeah, science behind it is fascinating. And you know what? It might not seem like it, but melanin is one of the most studied subjects in Western science. Oh, thank you, Zizo. It's one of the most studied subjects. They have conferences on melanin. Do you know they have melanin conferences? I don't know how frequently. There might be like every other year, where scientists and researchers from across the globe, none from Africa, or very few from Africa, of course, come together to share their findings on melanin. And again, I should try and find what's this? Triennial, is this what it is? Triennial International Pigment Cell Conference. That might be it. There's some conference that they have. They are It is obsession. Yeah, they are desperate to get into this melanin thing and understand what it is, and most importantly, they're desperate to synthesize it and make it in the laboratory, because that's what they do, isn't it? You know, whatever it is, cannabis. It's like, no, there's a cannabis plant. Yeah, it's, you know, no. What we do, we'll extract a small element of the cannabis plant, and we'll see if we can make it ourselves into something that we can get IP, intellectual property rights on, and then sell it back to the people from whom we got it from in the first place. That's what they're going to try and do with melanin, probably. You know, make some synthetic melanin and then see if we can, you know, start to sell it back to us. Yeah, there is a this melanin. It's a shame. Yeah, pro black. You said, I remember Joel Popcorn talking about melanin conference, saying the papers cost big money to buy. Probably, yeah. I can't. There's a brother in the UK who's doing a lot of lectures on melanin. He doesn't really, I don't know, he doesn't really promote them much, but he is someone that I definitely recommend you check out, because he goes, some of his videos go on a little bit, like he's you know, bless him, but sometimes he talks a lot about himself and like bigs himself up and like, oh look, I'm the only one who's saying this stuff. So you have to get through that sort of stuff. But if you can, check this guy out, because he is one of the few people who I've heard talk about some of these things. And I think he's written a book as well. It's the thing. I should always come prepared. Sorry. I'll find this guy at some point and share him with you. And then Tito District, the terpenes. Exactly. I remember my youth when I was in, you know, in my weed days, my big weed days anyway. And I didn't, all this, there was just weed. That's what it was, weed. And I kind of had a rough idea of THC, and, you know, that was about it. Now you look at the sort of world of cannabis, and it's like, there's terpenes, there's this, there's that. There's like 150 million different varieties of it. And you can get it for, you know, you get it from dispensaries and all that sort of stuff. It's like, it's become a very, very commodified and business, you know, I don't know, profit motive has come in and taken over that whole world of cannabis. Meanwhile, you got, you know, brothers and sisters in various parts of the world, it just grows out there. It just grows in the field, and they just pick it and use it for whatever they want to use it for. Not just smoking, but for, you know, food, drinking it in tea and so on and so forth, part of their spiritual practices and so forth. But yeah, this melanin thing, to try and wind us back to the subject matter, they're really studying melanin. It is a little bit of an obsession for sure, but just that mere fact is another indication that the kind of stuff that Richard King was talking about, that he's onto, you know, he was onto something. So yeah, that's the importance of melanin. The importance of melanin is that it is connected. And and by the way, Tito District, I would like to hear a bit more about this, what you said there about, you've been learning about the connections between melanin, light therapy, quantum biology, and neurology. Definitely would like to hear a lot about that. I love science. I'm really, really into sciencey type stuff. When I have time, I do like to read academic papers and all that sort of stuff. So please, if you've got any video recommendations or authors that you'd like to recommend, or articles that you'd recommend on all of that, then please do share it, family. And yeah, let's go. I'll just put that on the bottom. If you could like the video, if you haven't already liked the video for the algorithm, blah, 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 that'll be appreciated. Okay, so melanin is really important. It's got all these, you know, it connects to our consciousness, and, you know, according to Richard King, melanin is essential for us to be able to reach into the subconscious, to reach into the collective unconscious, and connect with the cosmos and all this sort of stuff, and link things together and be holistic in our ways. And then obviously, Marimba Ani, you know, Marimba Ani talks about, okay, the lack of melanin. And this is where Francis Cress Welsing, of course, all right, now see you in a bit, Aziza. Francis Cress Welsing, of course, has talked about the melanin deficiency and how that turns, you know, the Europeans, you know, they're scared of us, basically fear of a black planet. And so The idea, Marimba Ani kind of, Richard King's idea is that when the Europeans went off into, the parts of the world that they went off to from Africa, so when these, African emigres went off and migrated into the northern hemisphere, they got cut off from Africa and from the southern climes by glaciation, by the ice age. We talked last week when I was talking to Brother Kanji verse about the glacial period and how, for example, in Africa, the West African region, most of West Africa above a certain latitude was uninhabited for 10,000 years or something crazy like that. And thank you, Tito. Yeah, do please send me some information when you get it. Functional medicine perspective is useful, is kind of, that's the building blocks for the more speculative stuff, if you want to call it. But so the Europeans got trapped in Europe, and they got trapped in this no sun having place where actually the idea is that having lots of melanin in your skin potentially was not optimal, because you needed to have as much of the vitamin D as possible that was coming from the little bit of sun that was out there. And so over time, natural selection, selected for those with less and less and less melanin. Those are the ones who survived, were able to, survive in that cold, harsh climate. And so they, over a very short period of time, in the human evolutionary terms, like, just a short few thousand years, they would have went from being a black people to a white-skinned, demyelinated, unmelanated people. So what are the implications of that? Well, Marimba Ani says this. She says on page, I don't have a page number. I don't know why I've not got a page number here. Page 4, it'd be 46 something. 469, yeah, 469. So, okay, yeah, so those with darker skin had less chance of survival. With less melanin, the greater amounts of, okay, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Later, they began to get vitamin D from other sources, such as fish oils. So that probably links into, she's hinted here and there about how in the, Cheikh Anta Diop talks about how one of the differences between the northern cradle and the southern cradle was that in the northern cradle, they had more meat in their diet. And I suppose an explanation for that would be that they need vitamin D from the meat, particularly the fish. So they eat more meat. Whereas obviously whereas we didn't need to get so much vitamin D from our food. Is that the point? Anyway, let me quote the quote that I was going to share. Sorry about this. Let's get back on track. So she says, even from the little we know about melanin, we can assume that there were other side effects as well, i.e. side effects of a melanin deficiency. Melanin does not only affect the skin. In King's view, with less melanin, we could expect an overall lower level of nervous system integration, less activity of the pineal gland, and therefore greater instance of pineal calcification. This in turn might limit, and I like that, Marimba Ani doesn't, in this book, she doesn't just say, this is what it is, this is what it is. She suggests it. So she's saying, not that it definitely does, but she's saying it might limit access to right brain functions associated with the pineal gland. For example, the development of intuitiveness, holistic or global thinking, the ability to synthesize mentally, and the ability to comprehend spiritual truths. These are all right, the left brain, right brain idea, which has been a little bit pushed back against, but I think the basic principle is still kind of there, whereby the right brain is the side of the brain that more focuses on visual things, more focuses on connecting things together and synthesizing and harmonizing, art, artistic, music, rhythm, and all that sort of stuff. Cosmic. The right brain is more cosmic, whereas the left brain tends to be a bit more about fragmenting, separating. It's more verbal. It's about words, symbols, and all that sort of stuff, logic, reason, and so on and so forth. Marimba Ani's, or Richard King's argument is that, back to the thing, the comparative lack of melanin in the melanocytes, because all human beings must produce melanin, contrary to Welsing's implications. So subtle critique of Francis Cress-Welsing, or tempering of Francis Cress-Welsing's arguments. This lack of melanin in the melanocytes are the cells that create melanin, would render them, i.e. Europeans, less capable of understanding their emotional life. In King's view, this, in combination with the demands of harsh environmental conditions, caused the intensification of left brain functions, which are cause and effect oriented, and it cut off the unconscious as a source of knowledge. This would account for a materialist worldview, the emphasis on technology, and an inability to get beyond lineal concepts. It would also account for intensely destructive behaviors on a cultural level, stemming from the need for control, power, and aggressiveness. For King, melanin and the pineal gland are the keys to a deeper spiritual consciousness on which level human beings can integrate their understanding/knowledge to reach metaphysical truths that unlock the doors of the dark unconscious, bringing with it an emotional and psychological sense of security, a oneness with self, and inner peace. So she goes on, she does go on, she talks about, she talks a little bit like going into like the psychoanalytic kind of thing. And she talks about how these Europeans, I can't remember where she says it, but she talks about how, you know, with this melanin deficiency and all of the implications that she suggests come from that deficiency, being the, you know, too focused on the left brain, too logical, cut off from the unconscious, unable to connect with the cosmos, and so on and so forth. She talks about that. She talks about how the Europeans, like, they then develop this hatred toward blackness because it's like a hatred towards their parent almost. And she mentions how Carl Jung, when he went to Egypt, Kemet, Carl Jung said he felt like he'd been there before, and he felt like he'd been there before thousands of years ago. Similarly, Freud, toward the end of his life, apparently had a bunch of Kemetic symbols and images and statuettes on his desk, and he wrote this book called Moses and Monotheism, which argues that basically Moses, the purported great leader of the Israelites, got all of these teachings from the Kemites, and so there's this idea anyway that the Europeans view darkness and they're terrified of it, they hate it. They want to push themselves, they want to dominate it, and because they don't have it, they can't connect with it anymore. They can't connect with the cosmos. So instead of the only thing they can do is dominate it and control it, and all this sort of stuff. If that kind of makes sense. So that's, for me, that's I personally can't think of a better explanation for European aggression than that. That makes perfect sense to me, like, as far as the why. At the moment, I've not heard a better explanation of the why. For example, I think of Afro-pessimism. Afro-pessimists argue that everybody's anti-black apart from black people, and that it's just deeply rooted in their psyche for some reason. But the reason for that is I've not really heard any of these Frank Wildersons and so forth. I haven't heard any of them kind of explain the why behind it. That was always my question. If you watch any of my videos where I talk about Afro-pessimism, I was always saying, like, okay, yeah, this is cool, this is all good, but why are they like this? Where does this come from? And the big difference between what Richard King is saying here via Marimba Ani is saying here is that this isn't a universal thing that all non-black people have. Rather, this is a thing that's peculiar to Europeans as the most melanin deficient people on the globe. So yeah, make of that what you will. But I found it very persuasive, and I effed with that. That resonated with me. Cool. So there's a lot in this chapter. The last thing I want to talk about is talking about Afro-pessimism, but returning to what I see as a very, very Afro-pessimistic type analysis here. And I'm gonna share the image actually, so I can share it with you guys. So if you just give me 2 seconds, do like the video if you haven't already liked it. That would be appreciated. If I can, how do I do this? Add image. And then, oh yeah, here we go, snapshot. Oh, perfect. Good. And then I'm just going to share this image in a second. Boom. Where is it? Can you see it? Oh, hang on. Where is it? Why can't you see it? Oh, backgrounds aren't visible in solo layouts. Ugh. All right, sorry about this. Why can't I? When they change things, hang on, maybe this might work. Can you add item? Hang on. No, camera shot. No. Do you know what? Let's forget that. Discard changes. Sorry about that. On page 478, if you have the book, you can turn to page 478. She gives she says this: what follows is an equation of European collective behavior towards the other. She kind of brings it all together by saying this is how it works. So you've got European ideology in its different manifestations: Christianity, the idea of progress, evolutionism, scientism, and white supremacy. All of these has a European self-image. So for Christianity, the self-image is that they're religious, moral, cultural beings. But the cultural other is a heathen, non-religious, and immoral. Because of this, the cultural other for the European must be saved. In the idea of progress, the European is progressive, modern, a cultural being. The cultural other is backward, and the cultural other must be developed and advanced. In evolutionism, similarly, the European is civilized, a cultural being. The other is primitive, that must be civilized. In scientism, the European is the scientist, the knower. The cultural other is the object, must be studied, known, controlled. And then white supremacy, the European is white, racial being, pure, a human. And then you've got the cultural other is black, dirty, non-human. And that cultural other must be avoided, pitied, enslaved, destroyed. She writes, it must be understood that the ideas of save, and this is heavy stuff. This now, what I'm going to read now is heavy going stuff. It's like listening to, I was thinking about this the other day. It's like listening to, I tweeted or I said on Facebook the other day, I've been trying to listen to, probably shouldn't say this because I might start a conversation. Let me say it afterwards. I'll say it afterwards. It's like listening to a very heavy piece of music. It's like, oh my God, this is really heavy. I'll say what I was going to say afterwards, not to distract us too much. But Marimba Ani says, it must be understood that the ideas of saving, advancing, developing, civilizing, or studying do not indicate an identification with the cultural other or a desire to make her into a European. They all translate into the idea of control. They symbolize primarily and essentially a power relationship in which Europeans are supreme. Each ideological component contributes to the support of European imperialism and expansionism, because each ideologically supports the objective of power over others and attempts to transform European choices into inevitably and humanly desirable universals. So that universalism thing is a very key thing in this. It's to kind of understand, as Tito, you said earlier, fake European universalism strikes again. The difference between the militarists and the missionary is only one of modus operandi, mode of operation. The blows of one are more physically apparent, but those of the other leave battered souls and cultures in their wake. And then this last paragraph is where it gets all heavy. Each ideological component contributes to the creation of an image of those who are different from the Europeans, which generates a conception that encourages the style of behavior that has characterized the European relationship to majority peoples. This conception is that of the cultural other, i.e., a being who is justifiably the object of missionizing or of scientific consumption and manipulation or of mass brutality. In either case, the cultural other is grist for the mill. She is material to be used. She is expendable. This web of interlocking ideological systems, i.e. white supremacy, scientism, progress, Christianity, is the vehicle by which meaning is injected into European life. What they accomplish is the devaluation of people outside the culture. The essential characteristic of the conception of the cultural other, however, is not merely that she is worth less than a European, but she is worth nothing. The cultural other is a being who lacks meaning, whose existence has no human significance in terms of the European Utamawazo. The cultural other has significance only syntactically as a concept that assures Europeans of value in their own terms, therefore as a concept on which the Utamarojo thrives, and as a concrete object on which Europeans existentially act out their most destructive instincts. So Marimba Ani is not messing about now. It's like, you know, if you wanted a book, if you wanted a chapter or a book that is going to like make you feel lovely and warm inside, this isn't that book, because this book is telling you straight to your face what you are seen as in the eyes of this European this European asili, this European culture. She then, on the conclusion, there's another paragraph that I do want to read. She says this in the conclusion. She says, she makes the point that Europeans are very different. They're very distinct. They're very different to everybody else. All other cultures have a concept of other. All cultures other. You know, what was I going to say? You are, you know, every culture. The Baganda see the, I don't know, Basoga as other. The Igbo see the Yoruba as other. You know what I mean? There's even clans within tribes. They you know, everyone has an other concept. It was other. But it's only the Europeans for whom the concept of the cultural other is necessary. It's necessary. It's not something that is necessary. So let me read it on page 482. This one paragraph. The relationship between European intra-cultural behavior and European behavior toward others is that the lack of love for each other requires an other to absorb aggression and allow a bond of identification to form between the members of the culture. Therefore, while power and racialism may play a part in the collective behavior of other cultural groups, important point, only Europeans are racist by nature and because of their culture. This is so because, one, they are the only people whose cultural asili is energized by the drive for power. Two, because racism can be defined as systematic behavior resulting from xenophobia in combination with the concrete circumstances of power. And three, finally, because only the European Utamarojo is insufficient in itself, therefore demanding a cultural, racial other to relate to. This combination makes racism endemic to European culture and defines the goals of white supremacy, European power over others, as the supreme goal of the culture. That is the statement that no other culture can make. And then I think I wanted to just read one more section on page 484. The point is that, yeah, she said the cultural other is significant only insofar as its existence is necessary for the maintenance of the European self-image and Utamarojo and provides for the survival of the European culture. Yeah, that's the point there. So very, very clear is what she's saying here, as she said in previous chapters, what she's saying here, what she's trying to get non-Europeans to understand is that it is futile to attempt to be united with these people. That's basically what she's saying. It's futile because their very sense of who they are depends on having this cultural other. And it is very, very, you know, Afro-pessimism says a similar thing, slightly differently, but the Afro-pessimists say a very, very similar thing. Baba Amos Wilson says similar things as well, that like it's a foolish task. If you try to unite with these people, you will end up getting destroyed. And I think we've found that as well. We keep getting, she has this really good conversation about how one of the ways that they hide the true nature of European culture is to go down this race relations angle that, oh, everyone's racist. What we're trying to do, we're trying to just make sure that we mitigate against the negative effects of racism. And what she's basically saying is that, no, don't let them do that. Because if you do that, if you get into that whole race relations concept, then you're missing the point about the true essence, the true nature of European ideology, European cultural asili, and I don't know. I'm like, it's shocking. It is shocking to hear that, and like, you know, it's not something that you're going to shout off the rooftops, probably, you know. But for me, it makes sense of the world. For me, it does really make sense of the world for me. It helps me to, for example, not be shocked when I come across that guy. For example, what's his name? Neely. The brother in the United Snakes, and I think it was the United in New York. You know, the guy that used to do Michael Jackson dancing and so forth, and that guy, some white dude just jumped on him and strangled him to death. You know, George Floyd, of course. What happened to him? How they just sat on him and just, you know, strangled him, choked him to death over several minutes. Police, you know, or just whatever it might be, all these things that come up. Like 5 years ago, I was getting all shocked about Jordan. Thank you, my brother, Jordan Neely. You know, 5 years ago, I would be very shocked at all this stuff and angry. Like, I can't believe they're doing this. Not to say that I don't get angry about this stuff anymore, but it's an anger. It's a controlled anger in that I get it. I get it now. Yeah, I understand. This stuff makes sense if we have the asili, something like the asili concept that Marimba Ani has. It doesn't make sense, and it's only going to get you, you know, bamboozled. It's only going to get you really confused if you're thinking that, no, we can all just get along, man, and yeah, we're all just the same underneath. Which is, gosh, one of the things that I was reading a book to my children the other day, and it was like, yeah, we're all the same underneath. And it's like, listen, I get it. I mean, we kind of are all the same underneath, yes, in one sense, but in another sense, we're sort of not, because the people who are trying to tell us we're all the same underneath are the same people who are also, you know, who have spent the last several hundreds of years proving the exact opposite, that they do not think that we're all the same, you know. So yeah, that's kind of my main takeaway from this chapter is that it's given me a very hardy, a very resolute theory to understand white supremacy, to understand anti-blackness from the Europeans and so on and so forth. And I did really like that, as I said, that little conversation that she did with regard to Richard King's study on melanin. I love that, because I think that there, one day I'm going to find a book. Maybe we'll do Black Dot, I don't know, but one day we'll find a book that will go down into that in a lot more detail, because I feel that we do need to identify ourselves, you know, properly, you know, cosmically, and so on and so forth. So I think that was everything that I got from this book. It's a very, my goodness me, it's a very long chapter. This chapter, I thought I'd have enough time, because I gave myself something like 2 weeks. Because last week we did the Kanji verse one, so I thought, oh yeah, 2 weeks I can read 80 pages. I struggled to get through these 80 pages because Marimba Ani, this book is not a book that you can just skip through chapters, like skim read. Sometimes I try and skim read, and then I'll get like 10 pages ahead, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what she's talking about now. I need to go back and like read more carefully. Oh yeah, the book I was talking about. I was saying maybe, and everything's politics. I'm going to come to your comment in a second. Maybe the Black Dot, but what's this one? The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry. Ooh, is that by Richard King as well? African Origin of Biological Psychiatry. Let's have a look. Oh yeah. Ooh, written in 1990. African Origin of Biological. Ah, interesting. This might be the book that Marimba Ani was referring to. Yeah, I'll have a look. I do want to read some of these kinds of a book on some of these kinds of roads, but it has to be a book that's like written well and, you know, will kind of capture us and keep us engaged. I don't want to get a book. Like I said, when I did try to read one of his books, I did struggle a little bit with it. You're making me work now, aren't you? All right. What was the book that she said? Hang on a second. Let me have a look at the the bibliography. In the bibliography, she separates it. I don't know if you can see there. There's a non-African authors, an African authors one, which again, you can imagine someone saying, "You're so racist. Why does it matter if they're African?" Richard King. Oh yeah. Oh yes, actually. Can you even read that? There we go. Can you see it there? It is those. It is that book. Those two books. African Origins of Psychobiology, a lecture, and then the book itself, African Origins of Biological Psychiatry. Yeah, all right. I think he had a book. Richard King had books called The Black Dot. Pretty sure he had a book called The Black Dot. But yeah, interesting. All right, I'll have to check that out. Maybe. Yes, sorry, yeah, it's called, yeah, that book. So that book that you said there, The African Origin of Biological Psychiatry, is the book that Marimba Ani was kind of referring to there. I've not read that book. I've not come across that book, but I had a quick look on Amazon. Sorry to mention their name, but I had a quick look here and some good reviews. So yeah, that could be a candidate for one of the books that we're gonna look at. So yeah, that's me done. Let's go back to some of these comments. So Tito District, talking about Afro-pessimism and Frank Wilderson. Yeah, there's a couple of things that Afro-pessimists are. Or Frank Wilderson isn't. There's two things. One, he doesn't necessarily say much about. So what do we do now? We know all this stuff. What to do now? But then another thing he doesn't talk about that much is the why of why is does this anti-blackness, why is this so pervasive? Where does it come from? So yeah, everything is politics. You said Afro-pessimism comes to mind. Then you said, and this is the very reason why African peoples must seek independence from these people. Communism, socialism, etc. will not fix this issue. But communism, socialism, or whatever ideological approach we take within the African context is for us to decide. Yeah, exactly. That's the key thing. Exactly. We must decide what we're going to do. And we've got to be very, very careful with the allyship. Really, really careful with where we go, because I know what it's like. I know I'm aware of how, for example, when activists get into the alliances with, then the NGO money comes in, the not-for-profit money comes in, the doors get open. Oh, look, you can come and have access to these venues. You can do this, you can do that, and then what will happen eventually is that they'll suck you into the not-for-profit industrial complex, as I think Tito District. I think you said that in it last week. They'll suck you into the the not-for-profit industrial complex. They'll also. I was just talking the other day on Twitter about how it's the militancy and you're definitely going to get the sharp edges of your analysis and the sharp edges of your activism dulled, blunted, because it's just not going to be acceptable to your funders. So yeah, got to be really, really careful. And the thing is, it's an open thing as well. It's not I know of, for example, I know of someone who a white woman who's doing some really good work in helping to get white teachers to understand how anti-blackness works with books, school books and stuff like that. I did a video ages ago about this book called what are they called? The Color Monsters, and the black color monster. It's all about emotions, and the black one was scared or scary. And I did an Instagram reel about it about this time last year, and then this woman saw it and she reached out to me, and she's been doing a lot of work. I wouldn't say that people like her, for example, are doing good work. I just have to say they are doing good work, because that's work that they need to be doing. But I suppose the key is that don't let us get now led down that road of like, okay, yeah, this is the way that we will liberate ourselves by engaging with the system and doing seminars and talks and so forth. That has its place for sure, but let's not let that become what activism means for us, for if that makes sense. So yeah, it was you, Tito District, with the not-for-profit industrial complex. If someone hasn't written a book called that, then I'll be flabbergasted, because that's an open goal. That's in football, soccer. You Americans, you call it soccer. I don't know if you have a concept of like a free throw. You have that in your basketball. Yeah, it's a free throw. In soccer, we'd say it's an open goal. Like, listen, just put it in the back of the net. What was I saying that about? Sorry, I forgot why I even. Oh, that's it. Yeah. So someone needs to write a book, because it's just an open goal of a book that would just sell loads. I've worked a little bit in. I know that sector. I know the not-for-profit sector very well. So I should probably write this book at some point. Maybe when I'm about to retire, and it doesn't matter. I don't have to be scared about my livelihood getting taken away from me. Anyway, and then Oni, you said. I think you said you have. Probably you mean that you have that book, but you haven't opened it. Interesting. I'll tell you what. Let me just say, while everyone's here, there are two main books, because we have. So next week we're going to do. Thankfully, we're going to do a shorter chapter of only 20 pages. We're going to do chapter 9 next week, which is on progress as ideology. When this stream finishes, it will kick on straight to the next stream. So if you could just go over and like the next stream, that'll be appreciated. What I'll do, I'll just copy it here so you can go to it as well. But so then there, you can go there after we finished and like that. That'll be handy. So we've basically got three videos of Yurugu left. Progress as ideology, chapter 9. Chapter 10 is universalism. That's only 40 pages, and then the conclusion, Yurugu, the incomplete being. So by the 10th, 11th of June, we're going to be on the new book. The books that I've got on my radar are, let me know what you think. The books I've got. So one of the books is the Sobunfu Some book, which is what's it called? The Spirit of Intimacy. That's one book that I've ordered, and I'm thinking we may would be a good one to read. And then the other book, I do have this book called Kindezi, which is a book written by Fukiao. So that's a book. I might just do that anyway, because I do have it. It's called The Congo Art of Babysitting by Kimwandende Kia Bunseki Fukiao and A.M. Lukondo Wamba. So that's a book we might do, because that's a very, very tiny book. It's only 40 pages. So maybe that'll be like a palate cleanser book. And then the other book is the other book by Fukiao, which is the book. Was it the Congo? What's the book called again? The Congo Cosmology, the cosmology of the Congo, Bantu Congo. Sorry, let me find it. Fukiao. There we go. Of course, I can't find it, but that's a book that I was thinking of doing. Let me know if you've got any of those that particularly jump out at you. But yeah, those are the books that I've got on my radar. I'm all leaning toward the Sobonfu Some one, but I will just have a quick look at this African origin of biological psychiatry as well, because that could be a good one to get into. But anyway, when I decide, I'll let you guys know. Thank you for your recommendations and suggestions on that. So on that note, I will call it a day. Thank you for chilling with me. Oh, you read all 3? Okay, wow, of course. Hey, this brother, check the pro-black perspective out, guys, because this guy, he's got a series on Yurugu that he's already done. He's done a few different book studies, and then he's got his Pan-African warship stuff that he does. Very funny guy, very much more just entertaining. There's edutainment, there's entertaining and educational. Really, really appreciate it. But check his channel out, guys. And yeah, same time, same place next week. We shall be doing chapter 9 of Yurugu. So I hope to see you guys there. All right. So take care, everybody. Have a blessed have a blessed week, rest of the Saturday morning, afternoon for you guys in the US. And yeah, for those of you in other parts of the world, just enjoy life. So, you know, all right, take care. Thank you, Tito. Thank you. Very nice stream today, you said. Appreciate that. Yeah. Deploy back perspective. Yes, I are. Go and check out one of his videos. Funny guy, man. More lively than my ones, I think. And then thank you, Everything's Politics. Great segment. Thanks to everybody else who's been in the chat. And yeah, I'll see you next week. All right. Peace. Kwaherini, should say.